First, I'm going to sort of just hand over to Joe Bonneau here, who is going to tell us about the student PC. So Joe did a fantastic job as student PC chair, and I would like to thank him a lot for that. So why don't we give him a hand? And at the same time, as sort of incoming senior chair, I'd like to appeal especially to maybe more senior members of the community that might be willing to be student PC chair again, as you'll see in the data, as a successful experiment. And we need now a new Joe. Can't impose on him to do this again. So anybody who is willing to volunteer or have suggestions for people who might do a good job, please contact me directly. Okay, go ahead, Joe. So.
Okay, thanks. I'm not going to go over the general outline of everything that we did. It was about a 2-month process, but basically it was we tried to make it exactly like the senior PC as much as possible. We had a same workload per student, same kind of deadlines. We tried to make it as close as we could. So I think the most interesting things to gauge how successful this was, first I'll show you some statistics about what students actually did. The high-level observation was that the students managed to reinvent almost all of the phenomena that you see in senior PCs, including the things that everybody complains about. They complained about people being unprepared and droning on in meetings and everything else that you know and love. And they also gave very, very similar scores. So looking at the distribution of scores, you can see it's very, very close. And this was with sort of very minimal guidance. Students basically knew what the meaning of all these scores were, at least we're handing them out about the same as the senior PC. The only very small difference that you see here is that it looks like senior PC members, given a paper that was on the borderline, were more likely to push it to a 2 here, which would be a weak reject. And the students gave those papers on the borderline slightly more the benefit of the doubt, although wasn't a significant difference, so who knows. How does this advance? I just hit the green? Right. Students did express lower expertise for papers. We weren't totally sure how that was going to go, but I guess it makes sense in retrospect. Students felt a little bit less confident in their reviews. Really interesting question, though. How did the results compare? So the students actually chose their own program completely independently. It happened weeks before the senior PC. And they accepted, this was amazing how close these numbers ended up being. Without, on either end, any real guidance about quotas or cutoffs, the students accepted about as many papers as the senior PC did. And again, this is the same process. They sat in a room and argued and decided what was above and below the bar. However, the real question is, did they accept the same papers? They accepted 9. So of the papers that were in both piles, there were about 180 papers that both the senior PC and the student PC reviewed. There were 9 papers that were accepted by both PCs, and then there were about 20 or 19 papers that were accepted by one but not the other. So pretty big difference there, although we can at least establish statistical significance that it was not completely random, the results between the 2 PCs, but it wasn't too far off. So on one sense, this is maybe kind of says that the performance wasn't great, that they picked largely a different set of papers, but having sat through both PC meetings, a lot of the papers that got accepted by one or not the other, I mean, there were actual real reasons for it. So it made sense. I thought that there were, it seemed a lot more impressive actually seeing it than the N numbers. That it seems like the results differed a lot. But I think that both groups actually made very defensible decisions. The other thing people really wanted to know, how was the inter-reviewer agreement? So at first glance, it looks fairly good for both groups. 2 random reviewers within the pool of students, within the pool of senior PC members, or across groups. A little more than a third of the time, they would assign the same score. If you control, I guess we lost something. if you control for the fact that that reviewers will agree by chance a lot of the time, the correlation is really, really low. The correlation coefficient scaled between 0 and 1, it's about 0.1, both for the senior PC and for the student PC. So the good news is that these students largely agreed in actually giving out scores with the senior PC, although they disagreed in the final decision quite a bit. The bad news is that both groups had very, very low agreement between reviewers. Although maybe that's healthy, we got different opinions and people had different perspectives. The most positive thing though, which in encouraging, hopefully we'll have some folks interested in sharing this next year and repeating the experiment. Students really, really enjoyed the experience. We surveyed them at the end. They strongly said that it was worth the time. It helped them understand how PCs work. That bottom line was supposed to say that they wanted to do it again or recommend to someone else in their group do it again. So hopefully this will become tradition. Students having seen it said that they would go back to their research groups and tell the more junior students that this is worth their time, worth doing. It was a great way to learn some things that really couldn't be learned just by reading papers about how PCs work, but actually being in a meeting room and doing it made a difference for the students. So that's pretty much it. Should we pause if anybody has any questions about this?
Yeah, any questions about the student PC? Okay.
Hello.
So you guys actually, you had a bunch of offline reviewing, and then you actually had them come and meet in a room and debate?
Yeah, we had an in-person student PC meeting with 40 members, and it was just up the road at Google. So we did the full experience. We were in a room for a day. People had to argue. They had to get tired at the end of the day, and all of it.
Get grouchy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Are your slides going to be available after this?
Yeah, I'm going to compile this into kind of a report summarizing the experience with sort of some more detail. So I'll definitely publish something over the summer about this.
And you're planning to do this again next year?
Or
someone is planning to do it again?
Yeah, someone will step forward and volunteer to be chair, but we're.
Yeah, I'm recruiting as I. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And how did the students get to the meeting? I mean, did they get some funding to do that, or do you need some funding to get the students to the meeting?
More funding would be great. We kind of, we piggybacked off of Real World Crypto. We were co-located, so some students got a stipend to go to Real World Crypto. A few got funding directly from, I think TCSP was who funded, and some students drove up from Santa Barbara at 3 in the morning. So it was a mix of it was a mix of scrabbling together resources for students to make it.
Okay, super. We'll talk. Thank you.
Yeah.
As a member of a student program committee, I just want to say thank you. I learned lots from you, and it was a great opportunity, and I want to encourage other students to participate, and I hope you will continue in this process for next year. Thank you.
Great.
Well, I asked you offline, but I just want to, have the conversation for the room, which was how many of your students were women or underrepresented minorities, and I think your answer was 4 women out of 40.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I'd like to make that a goal for you next year to
for sure.
Increase that.
Yeah. So small, 4 out of 40. The significance is low. It's roughly in line with the.
Yes, the 10% we pretty much see here at the conference.
Yeah, but that's definitely some ideas on how to push that number up are definitely in line.
Thank you. So much.
So I don't know whether you guys have heard of the NIPS experiment, where they actually did this with one PC and sort of one shadow PC. I would say, I don't know where the funding has come from. Deborah just offered something. But I think I would like to see if there's any way, maybe not next year, to have that NIPS experiment replicated as an Oakland experiment, just to see, because so NIPS experiment was they actually did a PC, and there was a shadow PC, not students, exactly the same composition, professors, and what they found is there was some agreement among the top papers. After that, there was no agreement. But I would like to see if there is sort of a transferability
I
of
would
that concept.
very much hope that we could sort of get more data along the lines of the NIPS experiment. Maybe CCS is willing to do that. We, as we'll see in the next few slides, so we have several experiments that were ongoing this year, and we are hoping to continue our spirit of experimentation next year. But yeah, thanks so much. Now, back to some of the data that was there at the beginning. Vitaly showed that. He's on an airplane right now. So we actually added a whole bunch of reviews, but we did not see an increase in the number of submitted papers really from the previous year. So this was a big change from that year where there was like 25% more submissions and 20% more accepted papers. Now, on that note, both Usenix and CCS this year have been seeing growth in the number of submitted papers, 12% at Usenix and I think 28% at CCS. I heard that number. I don't know if it's correct, but at least there's lots of CCS submissions. So we'll see maybe why we didn't see an increased number of submissions here. I think on that note of not increasing, the reason why there is not an increase in the number of attendees over last year, actually there's a drop, maybe because of the overlap with the CCS deadline. I know at least several groups were hard at work and did not come because of that, and so at least anecdotally that may have been responsible. So let's go on. We actually had an appeals process instead of rebuttals. This was one of our experiments. We had early rejects so that people could, in fact, start working on their papers for another conference. And then you could appeal that early reject instead of writing a traditional rebuttal. Only 10 submission authors chose to use that opportunity. Of those 10 sort of early rejected papers that were appealed, the expert adjudicator saw something wrong with the previous review process, and so there were more reviews for 3 of those papers. One of the papers with more reviews made it all the way to the PC meeting, but unfortunately was not accepted. From the other papers, unfortunately, we decided, and I think Usenix made the same mistake, of allowing the rest of the papers, the ones that were not headed for early rejection, to submit an appeal. And an overwhelming number, 70 out of 200, decided to use that opportunity and wrote what to all parties involved felt mostly like traditional appeals, traditional rebuttals. So these were not appeals which were like factually wrong, bad process, bad motives or something else, something seriously wrong with the process. This may be read as, in general, everybody's unhappy. The reviewers are unhappy with the volume of papers and the quality of the papers they review. They write reviews that express how unhappy they are. The authors, when they see those reviews, they are very unhappy, and they even feel, if you tell them, only complain if you see tremendous flaws and unfair treatment and so on, a third of them will complain and say that this is completely unacceptable. That's basically the bar that we had for appeals. Now, and this sort of begs the question, can we try to fix that in the community? Only 3 out of the 70 were seen as being like wrong enough for extra reviews. They got even more reviews than regular papers. One of those was in fact accepted. Now, as Vitaly said, there was a paper that was headed for early reject that was saved, not by the appeals process. In fact, the appeals process would not have saved this paper. It was saved by a PC member saying, look, this paper has to continue, which is what the PC is there for. You're allowed to go and actually look at other papers and so on, and we've all been on PCs, or many of us. So it was saved by the regular process, not by the appeals process. Interestingly, the adjudicator, total expert in the domain, like you could not have asked, and completely impartial, like had no stake, rejected the appeal. So if it had just been the appeal and not this PC member, the paper would have been rejected, early rejected. But it was here at this conference. So, so we have sort of at least some anecdote that there's a lot of randomness in the process, a la the NIPS experiment. Now, the other thing that we did, which was sort of a notable experiment, was we actually had this special process for certain groups that where there's a single author on many papers, up to 10, 12 papers. I've heard numbers as high as 18 in the past. And we drew a line, and this is very controversial, and we really don't have time to get into all of the controversy, but we drew a line somewhere and we said a single author cannot be on more than 3 non-systemization of knowledge papers without some repercussions. Those repercussions are basically that they have to include any previous reviews and so on. It's a voluntary thing. Now, interestingly, most of these sort of groups that we know have a tradition of submitting a lot of papers did only submit 3 papers, and those papers had a significantly higher chance of being accepted, which actually was kind of our intent, is try to get people to focus on a handful of papers and try to get those in the best shape possible for an Oakland submission. And we saw that, at least from the acceptance numbers, that held true. Also, there was a couple of groups that decided to submit a lot of papers and just go through the bulk process. And their acceptance rate was actually very low, like significantly lower than the average. So one could say that the bulk submission strategy may have had an effect. At least the number of submissions did not grow. Now, previous year, there were 44 additional papers. We're seeing huge growth in both Usenix and CCS. Now, with that said, this bulk submission thing was a reasonably successful experiment, but it's not something that really solves the issue in any way in our community. So Brian Parno hopefully can join me here, and we can talk about like a more radical or non-radical, depending on how you look at it, proposal. So Brian and I would like to propose to this business meeting that we be given a mandate to plan over the next year a VLDB-like submission process for IEEE, security and privacy. So the concrete ask is that we get a mandate over the next year to plan and lay the groundwork for such a process. If people don't know the VLDB-like process, it's basically an ongoing submission process. Every month there's a deadline, you can submit that month, and the reviewing process is also ongoing, and you will get responses basically within a couple of months. And you will know whether your paper was approved or not. Often there's a revision. And now at the May 2017 business meeting, the plan, which will by then be like no surprise to anybody, will be either approved or rejected. We are asking mandate to set everything in motion so that if the plan is approved then ongoing submissions can open in June 2017. If the plan is rejected, then there won't be any major consequences. The standing PC will basically not be a standing PC, but rather a regular one. So we're going to sort of go through, and maybe each of us will look at the next few slides. We have just some sort of more information about this, as you might expect. So Brian, maybe you can talk a little bit about the goals.
Sure. Yes, so our goal is to try and give people more opportunities to submit papers to Oakland and to try and get good results out to the public and to the general community faster. So if you have a good idea in February, you shouldn't have to wait until the following May to have your paper appear or to get feedback on it. And part of that is both to increase the rapidity with which we can disseminate good research, and also to reduce the pressure on people to say, you know, it's the night before the deadline, I have to submit tonight, or I'm going to have this big gap before I can submit again to Oakland or even to the next conference, say to NDSS or CCS in the fall or spring. And at the same time, we're hoping that this will help increase the quality of both the papers that come out of this process and the reviews that authors receive during the process. So the hope that is if you're only submitting papers when they're ready, when they're good to go, then that means that the review process will already be a bit more pleasant than it is today. That by having this possibility for a revision, that reviewers can focus on what would it take to make this a good paper, rather than what can we do to sort of cut down on the number of papers we can have at the conference. And that also means that there can be a little bit more of a dialogue between the reviewers and the authors, so that you can understand where both sides are coming from and work through the issues that might be in the initial submission. And finally, to move from a system where, for all the unfortunate CCS reviewers in the audience who just got emailed about the 20-some papers coming their way, instead, maybe each month you get an email that says, here are your 2 papers you need to review this month. And we're hoping that that leads to a little bit more humane and satisfying review process.
Right. So it should be noted that we're not really talking about greatly expanding the scope of what papers are showing up at the venue. We're really talking about improving things for the papers that really deserve to be here, but maybe after like 1 or 2 rounds through the sort of refinement mill, by building in a refinement mill into the process itself. In fact, very often, and certainly this was true for a lot of papers that made it to the PC meeting this year, it's very clear that this is good work that will in fact be published at a venue of a similar standing as Oakland. It's just not quite ready yet. And this, especially when it happens 2 or 3 times, as can easily happen, 4 or 5 times is not unheard of, greatly increases the amount of work that the entire community has to spend on reviewing. So one of the things we want to do is to try to change the process in a way that makes the reviewing process better, but also reduces work overall. Now, details on the VLDB process, we really focused on that. We also collected data, so we spoke at length with VLDB people, but also PETS people, and so on. There's more conferences that are starting to go down this route. So they have a once-a-month submission deadline. The reviews are turned around in about 6 weeks, and so you definitely will be middle of revisions or have prepared some other version 2 months later. The accepts are only about the same as what we're seeing here, is about 20% or similar as CCS. And the rejection rate is still that of a normal conference. It's not like archive where everything gets in or everything gets in eventually after multiple rounds. In fact, most papers get revised, but only once. There's a very small percentage that gets accepted without revision. But then only 80% of the revised papers get accepted. And so this gets into the total rejection figure. So this is not shepherding as I know it from OSDI or SOSP or similar conferences that have mandatory shepherding. This is really a revision process where there's a very significant chance that if you don't do the right thing, you will be rejected. And where the right thing is what you establish in collaboration with your reviewers with the help of the PC. Now, this is just how VLDB is doing it. We don't necessarily intend to follow this down to the letter, except for the rapid submission sort of deadline rate. But the important thing is we want to sort of keep the spirit of this and and have an open and transparent process to figure out exactly the details of what we would adopt in our community where we involve everybody. So here's some data from VLDB more. So the sort of overwhelming majority is not submitted at the last minute. There's a big bulk here spike at the end. Interestingly, we talked at great length to people who have adopted this process in other communities, and the change is incremental. So it's not the case that the first year all the papers come early. No, it's like the first year is mostly similar to a normal process, but then the submissions in the early months start increasing. You can clearly see an effect of other deadlines. Here, SIGMOD, which is really the only comparable venue to VLDB in the database community, has 2 deadlines a year, and you can see the dip in both of them as people decide to submit there, not there. Now, moving on, we want to sort of flesh out the details openly. We want to have a vote which hopefully would allow us to start the process in May 2017, fully prepared to doing that. The one given is we want to keep sort of the spirit of the VLDB one as we understand it, and this is from detailed sort of discussions. We've also discussed with a number of people in our community, and sort of previous PC chairs, etc., And we've sort of heard quite clearly that there's little enthusiasm for establishing a journal, as PETS and VLDB have done. People feel quite happy with this being a conference, not associated with a separate journal. There's a strong desire to have some sort of PC meeting for the networking and sort of overall holistic view of the community and what's happening. We actually have many ideas on how that might happen in some form. And there are more radical proposals, but we don't have to go through them here. We can discuss those as part of the process. So some people feel that just adding more sort of rapid submission is not doing enough. But as I said, we'd like a mandate to start at least the discussion. So in particular, we would like this to have positive changes on the entire community. And we'll start by sort of surveying what is the community's feeling about the current situation right now, and try to design some metrics for like positive or negative changes. And we'll try to coordinate with the other main sort of top tier security venues. Now, I'll just finish with the ask. And so after some discussion, we would like your vote to start planning now at this meeting. Yeah, I'll take it to the floor.
Yes, can you hear? Great. Okay, so I'm Ian Goldberg, if you don't know me. I'm on the board of the Privacy Enhancing Technology Symposium, PETS, which, as you mentioned, did a very similar thing. We just finished our second year of the new system. We didn't go for an every month deadline. We originally planned every other month, but then it turned out it was way too hectic on the PC, and we went to every 3 months. So we have 4 times a year submissions now. For PETS, it turned out really well with an asterisk or 2, but mostly really well. Submissions are way up. In fact, we're stressing a little bit. We added a whole day to the conference, and we're still kind of not sure how we're going to fit all the papers in. But that all said, so it worked really well for PETS, and I am opposed to doing it for Oakland. And the reason is because I think this is not crazy enough, okay? So actual proposal I would see, I know you said you discuss crazy things as later part of the process, but the actual thing I would love to see, which this is not a first step toward, which is why I don't think we should do this and then fix it later, is have an all year round submission process, like you say, feeding all the top tier conferences, not just Oakland.
So I don't see why this is not a step in that direction. It's certainly a crazy direction and so on, compared to this modest proposal. But we are asking for mandate to start the planning process, which we're going to do openly, and which would include like suggestions like this. Coordinating between all of the venues and feeding into them sounds great. I think it's probably extremely hard to pull off. And I would disagree that like saying no to this right now, you're going to have to wait a while before anybody is willing to do anything. So, but anyway, so Mes.
So yeah, I'm actually in favor of it, but I think one thing is sort of like meeting Ian halfway. I do worry about what effect it will have on the top tier conferences. I don't know. I think.
So if we go,
I can't say.
If we go back to the, sorry to answer in the middle here, but the 2 deadlines that were added that are for SIGMOD, one of them was added, so they didn't have 2 deadlines traditionally. So this clearly will have an impact on the rest of the community.
So second thing I'm thinking is that, I know from we have a good database group at UW-Madison. What will it do to the tier 1? Will it completely kill those conferences?
So there, I would say that VLDB, there's a large set of sort of second-tier conferences and so on in the database and systems community, and third tier, et cetera, as well. VLDB has not changed their overall acceptance rate. And so presumably a lot of those rejected papers are showing up eventually in different tiers. And now, so this is, so I don't know if we'd see an explosion in submissions as Pets has seen. This is definitely one possibility. But I think a key part of this is to not eat the papers away from all other venues. Rather just try to have Oakland be the best Oakland that it can possibly be with better papers through a better process. Hillary.
I actually proposed in 1995 that it was really just one conference that was going on, and it happened to be held a few times a year, and that they really should merge the acceptance processes. However, with what you're proposing, I don't understand how you're going to come up with a program that fits into the amount of time that we're contracted for at the hotel. We contract 1, 2, 3 years in advance. Can't add another day. And if you fill up all of your slots for papers by January 31st, what are you going to do with the rest of the papers that are
So
turned in?
that is definitely a concern. People have raised the concern about sort of front loading the program, and there's also like huge concerns about sort of equivalence between areas, equivalence in quality between areas, and so on, depending on if there's not a PC meeting every single month, how does that actually work? Those are issues that, you know, are definitely important to discuss in the planning process, and maybe maybe there are issues that can't be resolved. I think from the experience of other venues, the change towards this histogram that we see here happens gradually, and the submission rates are quite manageable and relatively equally distributed. I can't promise that that's what would happen in our community, but I fully expect that it would. But as I said, this is, again, a request for a mandate to plan and lay the groundwork for such a process, not to implement anything right now, as we've said.
Well, I would suggest that it needs more discussion than just at the business meeting next
That's why we
year.
want to have an open forum for discussing and planning this and crafting. So exactly, and that would mean that by the time that a year has rolled around, we would have a plan that the entire community presumably would be familiar with and maybe has participated in crafting, and something that everybody would feel comfortable on voting. Yes?
So I'm Jan Shrutashvili from UCSB, and this is kind of a student's perspective on this. One thing that, well, to begin with, I like this solution a lot better than last year's attempt, or this year's attempted solution, and that's coming as someone who did have the paper accepted, so it's not just sour grapes. But one thing that worries me about this approach is, let's say you submit in, or let's say someone submits in January, and their paper gets accepted. Is it immediately available?
Yes, the plan is that it would be immediately available after acceptance.
Okay, because I was concerned that it would slow down.
Yep.
You know,
So basically yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, part of the goal here is to increase the rate at which we can publish, right? So the paper would be published online, the camera ready would be online in some form, and could be cited as to appear in the proceedings of, you know, Oakland 2018 or whatever.
Okay, yeah, it's a cool idea, and I actually do like it. I would like to propose an idea that I was going to propose, so it's not wasted, in that we can cut down on a lot of this rushed resubmission and so forth by moving the deadline of submission to be before the notification of the previous conference. So the deadline of Oakland would have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you have to choose to submit your best work.
So that definitely would have a big impact on the community, but that would also delay many papers, as the rejection notice would come and you have no venue to submit it to until 4 months later.
Or it might encourage people to work on their paper until it's ready.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah.
Like I said, I actually do really like this approach. So.
Patrick McDaniel, Penn State University. So I'm 100% for this idea. I just have two comments. The first one is that as this planning process happens over the next 12 months, I think it's really important for the community to have visibility into the discussion. A lot of these comments are going to come up. People are going to come up with things. So there's some place we can put on the website what the current, what the fact is. Oh, well, what about X? And give people that opportunity so that we don't have to revisit all of these issues. And we can actually get to a vote next year, because if we go off and build a plan and we don't have the community involved, it's going to be a problem next year. The second one is for the PC members, this is going to be brutal, and I think it's a year-long commitment, and it's going to be something where it's going to be in the back of your head. It's going to be like being an AE for the year. So I would highly recommend that the recommendation includes something about having a fairly sizable PC. Yep. And we might even consider something where you're only on board every second or third month. That way that you're not just getting beaten down every month, because I think it's just going to be too big a load.
So yeah, I think those are great remarks, and we definitely want to have put some initial plan on the website and have a discussion forum of some sort so we can get all that online and out in the open. And yes, I think both VLDB and PETS increased their PC size to some degree to achieve that.
And they have actually done some sort of rotation where they try not to assign new papers to all PC members every single month. So there's evidence basically to show that this can be done without tiring people out. And so I think Ian would also have even more evidence, for the 3-month process from PET. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That was crazy.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm Deborah Shands, NSF, and I'm just speaking for myself, not my organization. I'm not allowed to speak for my organization. This is a really interesting idea, and it seems like sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of things that need to be solved, and taking a year to sort of figure out how you might first start through this seems like a great idea. I just want to ask a question about one thing I just don't understand, which is one of the concerns is that we have heavy loads on the PC committees for actually all of these conferences. And that load seems to be increasing. And it seems that one of the issues is that people are resubmitting to, making some revisions, resubmitting to the next conference, and just making their papers marginally better. Is there something in this that makes that stop? I mean, in a sense, how?
At least for the papers that came up at the, so for the papers that were good enough to make it to the PC meeting discussion at Oakland this year, which was in New York, there was a bunch of them where it was very clear this was a good paper, it should be accepted, and there were just things that were not quite done well enough, not finished. There were sections that, and the rule of thumb for shepherding is basically no new material. So we could add a shepherding process where we said, okay, you can basically shepherd and add all kinds of new materials, but then do you actually make that in time for the conference? And because that may actually be a while until you're done. So this is definitely a way for taking those papers that would otherwise go once or twice through the sort of washing machine, because the time between deadlines is actually quite short. So usually the significant items that are identified in previous reviews are not necessarily done before the next submission. And then, of course, you don't know if they're going to be the things that are going to be complained about by the next reviewers. So it's actually a gamble to do a whole bunch of work. So in a sense, it's just better to try again if it's a reasonable paper. And so I think overall the review load would definitely go down for the community, especially if there was some collaboration on this. If, so for instance, if we started collaboratively sharing information about previous reviews, etc.
So just to clarify, so let's suppose I'm a particularly obnoxious and lazy author, okay? And I've gotten rejected, right? How does this prevent me from just entering in again the next month, renaming the paper? Can you stop me from doing this horrible thing?
So VLDB has a moratorium. So if you're flat out rejected, then you're not supposed to resubmit that paper again for 12 months. In the same way in which if you get rejected from Oakland today, you have to wait 12 months to resubmit to Oakland.
Okay, I think that was the piece I
What,
needed.
well, to follow up though, I think she's asking. How do you draw the line between it's the same paper versus they changed the title, they added some things and are calling it a different piece of work?
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll have to figure out as part of the planning process. And
Yeah.
I think I'd like to believe that most people are going to be good actors, so hopefully this is only going to affect a small number. I think one rule of thumb might be if it's a same or similar author set and a reviewer could write a very similar one-paragraph review for both versions, then it's a resubmission.
So the
not a
short
resubmission.
answer is that the chairs will have to do that
Right.
type of judgment until we get an AI bot to do it for
Okay,
us.
the thing I actually wanted to ask is the outcome of this planning process going to be one plan with an up or down vote? Is it possible that, there will be multiple alternatives?
It's unclear. There may be multiple alternatives coming out of the planning process. However, in order to keep it simple enough to discuss in a 1-hour meeting like this, most likely it'll be like one plan that there's also the question of the PC and others engaged. So since we're going to start recruiting for a PC, those will have to be willing to actually implement a plan and not have too many.
Is there a possible outcome to say, why don't we use Euro S&P as the guinea pig rather than sort of going, change the top thing at once?
So because this is slow going and the first year is not going to change very much, we're really talking about this having an effect in 2018. So this is not going to have any effect like anytime soon, even here. So trying it out first at another venue will slow down. But this is maybe
I
what
guess
the
I'm
community
saying, though,
wants. I think we need to go to the next question.
Hi, Jaehan Jung. So I chaired Usernix Security last year. So I thought about this a lot, and I'm really happy to see you guys proposing this. I'm just going to throw it out that I'm 100% for it. And then I'll also share one data point. So last year we collected, so voluntarily, the authors, they can say the prior venue that they submitted their work. And so 75 submissions last year for Usernix Security, they claimed that they submitted to Oakland. And out of those, 20 papers got accepted. So if you think about it, those 20 papers, if that went through this process, they could have maybe accepted with minor revision. Then maybe they might not have to waste sort of another like 3 or 4 reviews of Usernix Security. That's one. And then the other one is 55 papers got rejected from Oakland and rejected again from Usernix Security, right? Probably they got resubmitted to CCS. Right? So then another sort of set of 3 or 4 reviewers, they had to spend time pointing out the probably same problems. So I think these kind of issues, there's no way to fix because, like you said, these conferences are independently run. It's really hard to sort of collaborate unless there is a process like this. What's that?
You don't have 4 PCs, you have one thing, like I said, that feeds all the content.
Right, I mean, that would be awesome, but I'm not sure, like, politically whether that's possible. So without,
so I think
that would be a harder problem to solve.
I think like one thing that would come out, we need time to vote and so on. Actually, the clock has run out. But one thing that would come out the planning process is actually the community's thoughts on this issue. So they would actually create a forum where we would hear those thoughts, even the ones that some people might call crazy, whereas those might actually be the ones that are necessary. So now one more, Cynthia.
Okay, Cynthia Irvin. My question has to do with the PC. Suppose a paper is in the revision stage, and is there going to be a window in which they can submit their revision within a certain amount of time, or else it has to be completely considered anew? And what happens to a paper when the PC changes?
Yes. So again, I guess those are the kind of details that will hopefully work out during the planning process. But VLDB's model is that you have up to 3 months to submit the revisions, and after that, it's considered a new submission.
And suppose,
And they also ask the PC members and the sort of area chairs to continue their service up to 3 months after the normal end, so that they can shepherd those along.
And so that actually brings up like the one thing that you would actually be enabling us to do other than sort of start the hard work of setting up a website, a forum, and doing the planning process and so on, is actually when we recruit PC members, we'd be asking them to be prepared to stay on for those extra months after their normal service would be done, in preparation that next year they might actually be needed as a standing PC. So with that said, take it to Ulf.
Yes, so thank you, Alvar and Brian. So all they're really asking for is for these volunteers to go ahead and explore this concept through an open process where the community, where all of you can get involved, where you can see the discussion and so forth. So I think personally pretty much that this is a no-brainer to go and at least explore this. We're really not implementing any changes. So I hope we can do this with a simple show of hands. All those in favor for letting them go forward, please raise your hand. Thank you. Anyone against? Good. I think there you have it. Thank you for all your work so far, and thank you for all the work you're going to do.